The concept of cascading vision may be among the most powerful tools that we have for leadership in flow and the flow leadership framework. We combine the concept of cascading the VSPT, which again is vision, strategy, people, and tasks, and every area or level. I hate using hierarchies, but it's really tough not to. Uh, there's an executive VSPT. What's the vision? What are the strategies? Who are the people that need to be on the team? And what are the tasks that they're going to do in order to lead and inspire the organization? And then you're going to have a senior management level, and that will probably include portfolio management, among other things. And they're going to have a VSPT as well. At the program management level and line management level and product management level, they're in that third box, you're going to have a VSPT for all of those as well. And then if you use projects, more and more companies are just skipping that and doing programs and putting the teams into programs instead. Um, the project will have a VSPT. Do we have a vision strategy for the project? Do we have the right people? And are they doing the right things? Then the team, of course, it's the same. Do we have VSPT for the team? And then individually, the individual, their personal vision and their personal strategy, their why for being there, all of this needs to align going back up the food chain. Okay. Now, the one thing, we're going to talk about that in a few more slides, but that's basically the power of the one thing. And that one is where you, for example, one executive that came up with this, he was leading a very huge real estate empire that had grown to one of the largest real estate empires in the United States. And he did that by employing the power of the one thing. Each year, at the beginning of the year, he'd write down his 25 top initiatives of, if I did these 25 things, this would happen. And he would let that list sit for a couple days, and then he would come back and he would cut it by 80%. So he would take the top 5. He would prioritize his backlog, his list, and put it in ranked order of value, and would say, oh, these are the top 5. If I did these top 5, then this is what would happen for the organization. But the wisdom and the power of the one thing is that realistically, you're not going to do those 5 initiatives during the year. And so he would once again let it sit for a couple days, then come back and go, okay, of these top 5, which is the one thing. If I did this one thing, it will have this exponential impact on our organization. And it worked. It really worked. He ended up having just insane percentages of growth in his business year on year on year on year until he became one of the largest real estate agencies in the US. One of the things that we link back, and we do this via using retrospectives with the team. We do team health checks. We do flow friction analysis. We use retrospectives a lot. And from all of those, over time, about every 3 months roughly, we would try for the team at least. Individuals would give their one things back to the team. But from a team perspective, we were shooting for, if there's this one thing that the executives could do for us, and they were able to do this for us in the next 3 months, that would enable our team to do X, Y, and Z. And so that's the whole concept of having the little bit of a wafer small domino knocking over bigger and bigger blocks as you go up the food chain. Now, as you're going up the food chain, if you're at the executive level and you've got 100 teams in one of the portfolios, You may or may not want to be looking at those 100 things, but this is why you limit it to one thing, because otherwise, if each team came up with a laundry list of 10 or 20 items, you'd be looking at 1,000 or 2,000 items for maybe a single portfolio. Executives just do not have time for that. And so as it's going up the food chain, it needs to be filtered by the leadership as it's coming up so that they can help guide the organization in, okay, we've sorted through this list of 100, there's 10 left. They hand those to the executives and just say, okay, if the team's got these 10 things in the next 3 months, they would do X, Y, and Z. And then the executives can make an informed decision on that. Now, there's always the risk that maybe the one thing that didn't get through, going through that kind of filtering process, is the one thing that you actually needed. So I would almost want the executive to see the whole list of 100 and start to get a feel for what it is that the teams are up against. Now, if you're wondering what BHAGs are, and that's there on the left, that's big, hairy, audacious goals. And that comes from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. And it's sort of a parallel thought to the one thing. When you're dreaming big and trying to achieve remarkable things, you need to have goals and objectives that are big, hairy, and audacious. A lot of times, the executives will hand us a flashlight and a spoon and point us to this cave that has a big, hairy monster in the cave with very sharp teeth, and the monster isn't happy. And so by creating BHAGs, you're really trying to address the big, hairy, audacious goals, those monsters that you want to achieve and to win over. So there's a few things that we'll need to remember when we're cascading vision. The first one is language, and that there are many languages and many dialects spoken within an organization. There's also dilution that happens in an organization as the messages are communicated forward. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about distillation and distilling the one thing. As we mentioned earlier, if you've got business content, tools, and technology, they typically really don't communicate well with each other, and this falls into the first issue of language. And so it becomes a blocker, an obstacle, or an impediment. This also dovetails into what we did with the Stacy diagram and the complexity of the communication. If it's complicated, complex, or even chaotic, then that makes it even more vital to use agile methodologies, agile mindsets, and agile ways of working to overcome this first blocker and obstacle in language. And so we put a little explosion there. So between business content and knowledge side of the organization and the tools and technology side of the organization, they think that they're communicating to each other, but many times they're not on the same page. They may even be using the same words and mean two very different things. I can give an example. If my wife goes to the closet and says, I don't have anything to wear, it's not because there isn't clothes that are hanging in the closet. 9 times out of 10, it means we're taking a trip to the mall because she doesn't like the color, she doesn't like the way it fits, or it's old, or whatever. All of a sudden, she's like going, no, we're done. Now, if I, as a guy, go to the closet and say, oh, I don't have anything to wear, it literally means I have nothing to wear. It's time to do laundry. Exact same words, two complete different potential meanings. Another blocker or obstacle in addition to the business content side and the technology side, thinking that they're communicating, but they're not, they're actually missing each other. There's also sort of a top to bottom communication where if you've ever listened to the executives and senior management speak to each other, it's almost like they're speaking in a completely different language and a completely different code. And they're speaking the language of leadership, the language of vision, inspiration, and so on, and governance. Now, that's the language of leadership. And this line in this picture isn't necessarily perfect. This is actually a result of me working with a company out on the West Coast. Oh, this is about 7 years ago. Flew out there during December and realized that as I was listening to the conversation in the room, and they hadn't drawn this picture up on the flip chart, but I went up and I drew the picture of executives and senior management, portfolio, program, project team, and people. And I said, here's where the two groups weren't communicating, because half the room was Agile coaches. And not just Agile coaches, they were Agile purists, where they wanted to maintain a space for Agile. That's great. The other half of the room were battle-scarred veteran management consultants. And as I sort of sat in the middle of the room between the two groups, and it was like a tennis match as I was going back and forth, watching, going, wow, this is really interesting. So I drew this up on the board, and everybody stopped and they looked at me. And then I drew sort of this rounded box from about program level up and another box from project level down. And I said, over here, you're talking the language of management on the Agile side. And over here on the management consulting side, you're speaking the language of leadership. You guys are using similar words, and they mean completely opposite of how you guys are using those words. And they just looked at me, and the whole room went silent. And they were like, oh, it really hit them. And so in the transformation training videos that I've shared, I go into deeper why this language of management and the language of leadership is so important. But at the same time, this is also, if you think about the video of Jamie, where he was demoting himself back down to team level because he didn't want to deal with the politics. You know, the line might be between senior management and program management, wherever it's at in your company. There's a line somewhere where you stop speaking the language of management, of getting things done, versus speaking the language of leadership. What are the results, and how does that make us money, save us money, get rid of, mitigate risk, or how does that help us even do the right thing? That's the language of leadership. The language of management is, you know, here's the target, here's the goal, do it, deliver it, and if you don't, why? Who do I kick? And so that's always the risk of when managers are promoted into leadership, that they take that type of language with them. And so then you have a whole different host of problems. But anyways, there are two distinct languages here as well, and it's really important to understand the difference between the two. One of the things that I'm not sure our Agile friends have really understood completely yet is the difference between this language of leadership and language of management. And so if you look at the team structures and the program level items that are used, really safe scaled Agile framework, Scrum at scale less, which is large scale Scrum. You choose whatever Agile scaling methodology you want. All of those are just program level tools that they're trying to make them Agile. And they do not address the soft skill of how to communicate to the leadership in the language of leadership. They communicate in the language of program management, and that's why companies are attracted to those. But primarily, everything from program level down are primarily language of management tools. Okay, and it's tool set thinking, and they're not getting to mindset. They're doing agile, they're not being agile. And so, because of this, it's creating a blocker and an obstacle and an impediment in the organization. And so, all of these methods and tools, tool set thinking, they only partially address the two languages. They primarily just address the language of management, but they definitely do not address the needs of the leadership.